shooting wildly. These are well-organized cadres. Who's organizing them? I mean, it seems like an obvious answer to that, at least in the case of Iraq is. And I would say also in Syria. There's a percentage of the Syrian opposition who were defectors from the Syrian army. But in Iraq, it's much more prominent. Anti-government tribal organizations. I'll point this out in the case of Mosul with there's a group called Naqshbandi, and there's several others who are linked to regional tribal organizations that felt discriminated against by the new Iraqi government. Again, in the case of Syria, many of the rebels or revolutionaries, however you want to label them, have been Sunni Muslims, and one of the problems in both Iraq and Syria is that, as Professor Hess said, if you have a highly centralized state, a top-down control over everything, that makes a very easy target for opposition. Oh, something's gone wrong in our society? Blame the government, right? The big government, true big government, not American version. No state governments to blame. You just blame Baghdad. You blame Damascus. Unfortunately, in the case of Iraq and Syria, both before the war in 2003 and after it, the Iraqi state was constructed in part upon this Arab nationalist and, unfortunately, by default, Sunni Muslim identity, which meant that prior to Saddam Hussein's fall, the Shia in Iraq were the opposition, were comprising many, and the Kurds, a separate subset. I don't know time to talk about formal presentation. And after the fall of Saddam Hussein, it's clearly established that the government in Iraq was dominated by Shiite political parties. So, yet remained highly centralized. So now, instead of having a target of being the Sunni kind of, this is the perspective, right? The Sunni Iraqi Saddam Hussein-run government, now you have the Shia-run government in Baghdad. Right? This is also a factor. In the case of Syria, of course, the regime is widely perceived as being Alawite. Alawite's a certain break-off branch of Shia Islam that I don't have time to talk about currently, maybe in the question and answer. And so therefore, it's not surprising that on top of the grievances against the state because of lack of services or discrepancy in the provision of services, it's also, the central government, not only is it bad, but it's also bad and Alawite, right? This leads to, and then, of course, I already talked something about the transnational jihadist networks. There are others, but the most dominant one is Al-Qaeda, but there are other networks of kind of these, what I call traveling or migrant jihadis. So those are some of these structures. Now, framing, right? This is the concept that in order to, one of the other components of of being able to have a cohesive social movement is you need to have some kind of shared meanings and definitions that people can identify as a group. I told you already that Iraq and Syria are deeply divided by ethnicity and by both ethnicity and religious identities. Now, what would be a unifying element that could cross boundary, ethnic or class boundaries in the case of Iraq? Right? The answer is not Islam. The answer is Islamism. Now, I want to emphasize this point, which is that Islam is a broad and diverse religious system or systems comprising 1.6 billion people. Most of you know these factoids. That is a religious system, right, involving certain beliefs and certain religious practices. Islamism is a term we use, and somebody that would follow Islamism would be an Islamist, not a Muslim. Right? Somebody that follows Islam is a Muslim. Somebody that follows Islamism would be, we refer to them as Islamist. It means some way of mixing together or hybridizing Islamic portion, right, of faith and belief and practice with political ideologies and practices. Now that could mean anything, right? You could have an Islamist who believes that Islam is the basis for democracy, right? I know some individuals who believe this and push for it and write about it theoretically. And they have a whole system of theory about how Islam is not in any way contradictory with democracy or democratic principles. In fact, it should further democracy, right? You can find other Islamists on the entire opposite end of the spectrum that would say democracy is a Western imperial project, and Islam, the basis for society should be the Quran, right, the sacred text of Islam, and Islamic law. So Islamism would be then the frame here, where you, how would this work in practice? You choose specific Islamic symbols and texts, such as the Quran, Hadith, certain symbols that you place on flags, slogans, names from well-known earlier periods of Islamic history, characters, individuals, and you use them within a specific modern political context. Right? Usage of Islamic social structures, such as the Friday prayers and sermons. Right? This is something from Islam, right? That then could be used to gather and mobilize followers and recruits. The usage of social and administrative practices from earlier periods of Islamic history. What do I mean by that? Enacting certain things such as, there's a term in early Islamic history called jizya. Jizya is a term that comes out of the Quran. It's a term for a tax that was enacted upon non-Muslims during the early Islamic conquests. And in exchange for maintaining your own religious churches, for example, or synagogues and practices, which you were allowed to do within early Islamic history, you paid the government, which at that time was a kind of truly Islamic government, a tax, reenacting that tax on contemporary populations. That would be an example of administrative practice, or certain types of taxation practices. An attempt to enact a theoretical form of Islamic law. Most societies today that have a majority Muslim population, almost all of them, do not actually live under Islamic law. It's one of the biggest misconceptions about Islamic societies today, probably, which is that Muslim societies have Muslim law, right? Some people say Islamic law is what it should say. Not really true. The majority of Islamic societies today, societies where the majority of the population is Muslim, are governed by a hybridization of a variety of different legal systems, like the Ottoman Empire system, Roman law, believe it or not, some Napoleonic code in some countries that were influenced by French colonialism, British common law, American legal system, if you have certain types of constitutions. In addition to certain parts of Islamic law that historically have been enacted, like personal status, marriage law, divorce law, things like that. An Islamist of the type we're looking at with the Islamic State would say, no, we want to enact wholesale a Islamic law in every aspect. Now, what Islamic law, you might ask? It's a theory. Islamic law, for the most part, has remained a theoretical practice amongst Muslims historically for 1,400 years, where a specific Muslim scholar would sit down and write a book of Islamic law that would cover all aspects of a practicing Muslim's life here on earth, but what taxes they should pay, how they would form a partnership with a business partner, everything, right? Penal codes, any kind of crime, what the punishment would be. Normally that hasn't been enacted. So how does this look in real life, right? Then here's the Islamic State flag. This should be, and probably is, very offensive to most practicing Muslims around the world, because this flag has on it the core belief that you need to say in order to become a Muslim. Right? Islam's a very simple religion in the sense of conversion process. All you have to do in front of two Muslim witnesses is say and believe it, of course, post say this Arabic phrase, which is, "There's no God but God, and Muhammad is his messenger." This is what it says. This is now being used in the service of politics, so specific political structure. This is what I mean by Islamism. Right? Here's an example, I won't read any of it, but this is an example of a text where the leader of the Islamic State is claiming to be a descendant of Ali, right? An early figure in Islamic history, again. Transnational movements document, this is a document that targets Shia in Lebanon. It says our first target is the Rafidis, right? The Rafidiyya is a negative term used by some in a very ancient period of Islamic history for Shia. So again, they're co-opting a certain version of Islam, a specific version of Sunni Islam, and using it, employing it to divide, but also kind of enact their rule. Yeah, this is, I didn't show you the bloody head because it was a little too much, but the important thing here, besides the Arabic talking about the party of Satan, is the name of the man who posted this on Twitter. His name is Muawiyah al-Umawi. Those of you that are familiar with Islamic history know this was the first leader, first Islamic empire, leader of a first Islamic empire after Ali died, based in Damascus. So you can imagine this man is probably part of the Syrian branch of this. Possible. Again, transnational social movements. This is a sign from a region called Barqa in Libya, Walayat, Libya. Right. This is the state of Walayat Barqa. This is a sign being prepared for a newly independent region in Libya. Libya, by the way, is another ignored aspect of this entire conflict, which is should be the subject of a different talk, really. But then lastly, and I've really run out of time here, is that, and I don't really have time to go through this, but I highlighted what's important here, which is that Mosul is the second largest city in Iraq. As Professor Hess said, how did the second largest city in Iraq all of a sudden one day give up, was entirely conquered by the Islamic State within a very short period of time? Well, the answer is that since 2003, there has been, and even before that, there's been various disgruntled elements within Mosul, different ethnic and tribal loyalties, and even religious difference that have been building. And the people that became the Islamic State kind of infiltrated Mosul through tribal confederations. And as I put here, it served as an incubus for under-the-cover selfist jihadi movements which had been preparing to take action before 2003, before the Iraqi, the invasion by the U.S. And this is a little bit more on a group within Mosul called the Tel Afar, the Afaris, as the Iraqis refer to them. They were a disaffected group within the Mosul kind of sub-society within Iraq, who were viewed by, and predominantly Turkmen, ironically, who were viewed by the urban population, the educated urban population of Mosul, as kind of, in American idiomatic English, hicks. Well, they have now come to prominence amongst the Islamic State leadership in Mosul. Right? This is a local group of Iraqis who were irritated by various policies, both from the previous government and the current government, and that kind of set the stage for this. Again, here's a little bit about the use of specific labels on houses that identify different taxation methods that the Islamic State is now using in Mosul. So now, even though they're technically not a state, they are acting very much like a state in the territory they control. They label different houses with different labels, and some of them refer to houses that are going to be taken by the Islamic State because they were Shiites or Christians who have fled. Some of them are any inhabitant of Mosul that needs to pay a certain taxes, right? And then this is a little bit just about who are controlling Mosul. You have